Early life and the first revelation. Prophet Muhammad, PBUH, was born in the holy city of Mecca around the year 570 CE, a time remembered in Arab history as the Year of the Elephant. Mecca was already a famous city, known for the Kaaba, which drew pilgrims from across Arabia. It was also a center of trade, where caravans carrying goods from Yemen to Syria passed through. Muhammad, PBUH, was born into the noble Quraysh tribe, a tribe respected for being the custodians of the Kaaba. His father, Abdullah, passed away before his birth, leaving him an orphan, even before he opened his eyes to the world. His mother Amina cared for him, but soon after, she too passed away when Muhammad, PBUH, was only 6 years old. In his early years, he was placed in the care of a Bedouin family, as was the custom of Quraysh. His nurse, Halima, raised him in the desert where he grew strong, learned the pure form of the Arabic language, and experienced the simplicity of desert life. Later, when he returned to Mecca, he was cared for by his grandfather Abdul Muttalib. After his grandfather's death, his uncle Abu Talib took responsibility for him and treated him as his own child, growing up without parents but surrounded by guardians who loved him. Muhammad, PBUH, learned the values of patience, humility and compassion from a young age. As a youth, he began working to support himself. He helped with caravan journeys, gaining experience in trade and travel. He saw different cultures, religions, and ways of life during his travels to Syria and other lands. What stood out most was his honesty and trustworthiness. Because of these qualities, the people of Mecca gave him the title Al-Amin, which means the trustworthy. Everyone knew that Muhammad, PBUH, never lied, cheated, or betrayed anyone. His character spoke louder than words, and people respected him deeply, even before his prophethood. At the age of 25, Muhammad, PBUH, was hired by Khadijah, a wealthy and respected merchant woman, to manage her trade caravan. Impressed by his honesty and success in carrying out the trade, Khadijah developed a deep respect for him. Their trust and admiration grew into love, and soon after, they were married. Their marriage was filled with peace, love, and mutual respect. Khadijah stood by his side through every trial that life brought. Despite living in a society full of idol worship, corruption, and injustice, Muhammad, PBUH, never took part in wrongdoing. He never bowed before idols or engaged in immoral practices. Instead, he preferred solitude and reflection. As he grew older, he began spending more time in meditation, especially in the Cave of Hira, located on Mount Nur near Mecca. There, he would reflect on the state of society and the presence of the Creator. It was during one of these nights of reflection that everything changed. At the age of 40, while meditating in the Cave of Hira, he received the first revelation. The angel Jibril appeared before him and commanded him to read. Shaken and frightened, Muhammad, PBUH, replied that he could not read. The angel repeated the command and revealed the first verses of the Quran. Overwhelmed by the experience, he rushed back to his home trembling. Khadijah comforted him and reassured him that Allah would never abandon a man who was so truthful, kind, and caring. She took him to her cousin Waraka ibn Nawfal, a learned man who confirmed that Muhammad, PBUH, had been chosen as a messenger of Allah, just as prophets had been chosen before him. This moment marked the beginning of his mission, a mission that would change the course of human history. The early days after the first revelation were filled with deep reflection. Muhammad, PBUH, realized that he had been chosen to guide people away from falsehood, idol worship, and injustice, and towards the worship of one true God. His mission began quietly, with those closest to him. Khadijah was the first to believe in him and support him with complete devotion. Soon after, his young cousin Ali, his close friend Abu Bakr, and his servant Zayd ibn Haritha accepted Islam. This small group of early believers formed the foundation of a new faith that would spread far beyond Mecca. But for now, it was only the beginning. The Prophet, PBUH, was still preparing for the challenges ahead. Challenges that would test his patience, his courage, and his unwavering faith in Allah. The early struggles in Mecca after the first revelation. Prophet Muhammad, PBUH, slowly began spreading the message of Islam. At first the call was private and quiet. He invited only those he trusted most, people who knew his character and could recognize the truth of his words. His wife Khadijah was the first believer, followed by his young cousin Ali, his freed servant Zayd ibn Haritha, and his closest companion Abu Bakr. These earliest followers were devoted, standing by him despite the risks of leaving behind the ways of their ancestors. Abu Bakr in particular played a vital role. Known for his wisdom and kindness, he used his influence to invite others to Islam. Through him, many prominent early Muslims such as Uthman ibn Affan, Talha ibn Ubaidullah, Zubair ibn Awam, and Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas accepted the faith. Islam was beginning to spread, but it was still a small, fragile community. For 3 years, the Prophet, PBUH, kept the call to Islam mostly private. This period allowed the message to take root without direct confrontation. Believers would gather secretly to pray and learn from the Prophet. They met at the house of Al-Amin, a safe place where the early Muslims could worship without fear. During this time, the Prophet focused on building a strong foundation of faith, teaching his followers the importance of prayer, truthfulness, kindness to others, and the worship of one God. Eventually, the command came from Allah to proclaim the message openly. This was a turning point. The Prophet, PBUH, gathered his relatives and clansmen from Quraysh and invited them to Islam. He stood on Mount Safa and called out to them, reminding them of his trustworthiness and asking if they would believe him if he warned of an approaching danger. They agreed that he had never lied. Then he told them of the greater danger, that idol worship would lead them to ruin and that they must turn to the worship of Allah alone. This announcement shocked the Quraysh leaders. They were deeply attached to their idols, not only for religious reasons, but also because their status and wealth depended on them. The Kaaba was filled with idols, and pilgrims from across Arabia brought offerings. The message of Muhammad, PBUH, threatened their entire way of life. From this moment, opposition grew fierce. The Quraysh mocked him, accused him of being a poet or a magician, and tried to discourage people from listening to him. Yet the Prophet remained patient. He did not argue with insults. Instead, he responded with calmness and continued to preach. His message emphasized justice, equality, and compassion. He taught that all people were equal before God, whether rich or poor, Arab or non-Arab. This teaching challenged the tribal pride and social hierarchies of Meccan society. As more people embraced Islam, especially the poor and weak, the Quraysh leaders felt threatened. They feared losing power over those they exploited. Among the early Muslims were people like Bilal ibn Rabah, a slave of Abyssinian origin, who suffered greatly for his faith. His master tortured him by laying him on the hot desert sand and placing heavy stones on his chest, demanding that he renounce Islam. But Bilal, with unshakable faith, continued to proclaim, "One God, one God." Abu Bakr eventually purchased his freedom, showing the solidarity of the Muslim community. Other Muslims faced similar persecution. Some were beaten, some were starved, and some were even killed. One of the most tragic examples was the family of Yasir. Yasir, his wife Sumayya, and their son Ammar were among the earliest Muslims. The Quraysh tortured them brutally to force them back to idol worship. Sumayya refused to give up her faith, and she became the first martyr in Islam when she was killed for her belief. Her courage became a symbol of sacrifice for generations to come. The Prophet, PBUH himself, was protected to some degree by his uncle Abu Talib, who, though he did not accept Islam, defended his nephew out of loyalty and love. This protection limited what the Quraysh could do to Muhammad, PBUH, directly, but they tried other tactics to weaken him. They offered him wealth, leadership, and marriage alliances if only he would stop preaching. He refused every offer, saying that even if they placed the sun in his right hand and the moon in his left, he would never abandon the mission given to him by Allah. When bribes failed, the Quraysh tried threats. They mocked him in public, threw dirt on him, and even placed the entrails of a camel on his back while he prayed. Yet he endured all of this with patience and dignity. His strength came from his unshakable faith in Allah and his mission. His followers drew courage from his example, even as their hardships increased. As persecution worsened, the Prophet, PBUH, sought to protect his followers. He advised some of them to migrate to Abyssinia, a Christian kingdom ruled by a just king known as the Negus. This migration became the first Hijrah in Islamic history. The Muslims who fled found safety under the king's protection, and when Quraysh envoys tried to have them sent back, the Negus refused after hearing the truth of their faith. This showed that Islam's message of justice and monotheism was recognized even outside Arabia. Meanwhile, in Mecca, the Quraysh intensified their pressure. They placed a social and economic boycott on the Muslims and the clan of Banu Hashim, cutting them off from trade, food, and social interaction. For nearly 3 years, the Muslims endured extreme hardship, surviving on little food and enduring hunger and suffering. Yet they remained steadfast, bound together by their faith. Despite these trials, the Prophet, PBUH, continued his mission. He preached to tribes who came to Mecca for pilgrimage, hoping that some would listen and accept the truth. His perseverance was unshaken, even when faced with disappointment. The loss of his beloved wife Khadijah and his uncle Abu Talib in the same year was an especially painful moment, remembered as the year of sorrow. With the passing of Khadijah, he lost his greatest supporter and source of comfort, while the death of Abu Talib left him without protection from Quraysh hostility. Yet even in this time of grief, Allah strengthened him. The miraculous journey of Isra and Mi'raj took place, in which the Prophet, PBUH, was taken from Mecca to Jerusalem and then ascended to the heavens. There he witnessed the signs of Allah, met previous prophets, and was given the gift of 5 daily prayers for his followers. This journey gave him renewed hope and courage to continue spreading Islam despite the hardships. By this point, it was becoming clear that Mecca was closing its heart to the message. The Quraysh remained stubborn in their opposition. The Prophet, PBUH, realized that the future of Islam might lie elsewhere, with a community willing to accept the truth and support its growth. The stage was being set for a new chapter, one that would move beyond the Hijrah to Medina and the building of the first Islamic community, as opposition in Mecca grew harsher and hope for acceptance among the Quraysh seemed far. The mission of Prophet Muhammad, PBUH, was entering a new stage. The message of Islam had spread beyond the city, and people from other tribes were beginning to hear about it. Every year, tribes from across Arabia would gather in Mecca for pilgrimage. The Prophet, PBUH, used these opportunities to speak to them about Islam, hoping to find people who would support the message of Allah. During one such pilgrimage season, a group of people from Yathrib, a city north of Mecca, came into contact with the Prophet PBUH. Yathrib, later known as Medina, was home to 2 major Arab tribes, Aws and Khazraj, as well as several Jewish communities. The city had long been troubled by tribal conflicts and wars. When the people of Yathrib listened to the Prophet PBUH, they were deeply moved by his words and saw in Islam a chance for unity and peace. A group of them accepted Islam and pledged their loyalty to the Prophet. This was known as the First Pledge of Aqaba. The following year, a larger group from Yathrib came to meet the Prophet, PBUH. They not only accepted Islam, but also promised to protect him and his followers if they came to their city. This was the Second Pledge of Aqaba, a turning point in Islamic history. With this pledge, Yathrib became the future home for the Muslims, a place where they could practice their faith freely and establish a just society. Soon after, the Prophet, PBUH, gave permission to his followers to migrate to Yathrib. One by one, small groups of Muslims began leaving Mecca, often in secrecy to avoid persecution. The Quraysh, alarmed at this development, realized that if Muhammad PBUH also left, he would gain a strong base from which Islam could spread across Arabia. They plotted to assassinate him before he could migrate. Allah revealed their plan to the Prophet PBUH, and he prepared for his departure. On the night of the plot, he asked his cousin Ali to sleep in his bed while he slipped out unnoticed. Along with his loyal companion Abu Bakr, he began the journey to Yathrib. Their escape was not easy. The Quraysh sent men in pursuit, and a reward was announced for anyone who captured him. At one point, the Prophet and Abu Bakr hid in the Cave of Hira, where their pursuers came dangerously close. Abu Bakr was worried, but the Prophet reassured him with complete trust in Allah, saying that Allah was with them. By the will of Allah, their enemies were unable to find them. After days of travel through the desert, the Prophet and Abu Bakr finally reached the outskirts of Yathrib, where the people welcomed him with great joy. Men, women, and children lined the streets, singing and celebrating his arrival. The city of Yathrib would now be called Madinatan Nabi, the city of the Prophet, or simply Medina. The Hijrah, or migration, was not just a change of place, but the beginning of a new chapter in Islam. In Medina, the Prophet, PBUH, became not only a messenger, but also a community leader, judge, and statesman. One of his first actions was to build a mosque, which became the center of worship, learning, and community life. The mosque was simple in structure, but powerful in meaning, symbolizing unity and devotion to Allah. The Prophet, PBUH, also established a pact between the Muslims of Mecca, known as the Muhajirun, and the Muslims of Medina, known as the Ansar. The Ansar welcomed their new brothers with generosity, sharing their homes, wealth, and land. This bond of brotherhood between the Muhajirun and Ansar became a unique feature of the Muslim community, built not on tribal ties, but on faith and mutual support. Another significant achievement was the Constitution of Medina. This agreement brought together Muslims, Jews, and other groups in the city under one system of mutual rights and responsibilities. It guaranteed freedom of religion, justice, and protection for all communities, with the Prophet as the leader and arbiter. This was one of the first written constitutions in history and a model of peaceful coexistence. However, peace did not last long. The Quraysh of Mecca were furious about the Prophet's escape and the establishment of a new base for Islam. They feared the growing influence of this community and began preparing to confront it. Soon, the Muslims would be tested not only in faith, but also in battle. The first major confrontation came at the Battle of Badr. A Quraysh caravan led by Abu Sufyan was targeted by the Muslims, but the Quraysh responded by sending a large army to protect it. The Muslims, though few in number and poorly equipped, marched out with faith in Allah. At Badr, they faced an enemy 3 times their size. Yet Allah granted them victory, and the Quraysh suffered a crushing defeat. This battle proved that faith and unity could overcome even the strongest opposition, and it raised the morale of the Muslims. But the Quraysh were not willing to accept defeat. A year later, they returned with a larger army, seeking revenge at the Battle of Uhud. This time, the Muslims initially held their ground, but when some archers disobeyed the Prophet's instructions and left their positions, the Quraysh took advantage and turned the tide. The Prophet himself was injured, and many Muslims were martyred. The Battle of Uhud was a painful lesson in discipline and obedience, teaching the believers that victory comes only with unity and steadfastness. Despite these hardships, the Muslim community in Medina continued to grow stronger. The Prophet, PBUH, led with justice, kindness, and wisdom. He treated all people fairly, regardless of their background, and encouraged his followers to live with honesty, humility, and compassion. His example inspired those around him, and Islam began to spread across the Arabian Peninsula. the Quraysh and their allies made another attempt to destroy the Muslims during the Battle of the Trench. They gathered a massive coalition of tribes and besieged Medina. The Muslims, under the Prophet's guidance, dug a trench around the city as a defensive strategy, something new to Arabian warfare. The siege lasted for weeks, but the Quraysh were unable to break through, and finally they withdrew in frustration. This marked a turning point, as the Quraysh began losing their power, while the Muslims gained respect and strength. By the end of these years in Medina, the Muslims were no longer a small, persecuted group. They had become a united community, with a clear identity, strong leadership, and growing influence. The Hijrah had transformed Islam from a message whispered in secret houses in Mecca to a powerful faith guiding an entire society. The treaty, the conquest of Mecca, and the final legacy after the Battle of the Trench. The Quraysh realized that defeating the Muslims through force was no longer easy. Their power was weakening, while the Muslims of Medina were growing stronger in faith and unity. Still, the Prophet Muhammad, PBUH, remained patient and sought peace whenever possible. He always preferred diplomacy over bloodshed, and his trust in Allah guided every step he took in the 6th year after the Hijrah. The Prophet, PBUH, and his companions set out for Mecca with the intention of performing Umrah, the minor pilgrimage. They carried no weapons of war, only the simple provisions of travelers. However, the Quraysh feared that this was a trick and blocked their entry. For days, negotiations took place between the Muslims and the Quraysh, leading to what became known as the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. The terms of the treaty seemed unfavorable to the Muslims at first. They had to return to Medina without performing Umrah that year, and they agreed to certain conditions that appeared to favor the Quraysh. Some companions were disheartened, but the Prophet, PBUH, explained that patience would lead to greater victory. Indeed, the treaty turned out to be a blessing. It brought peace between the two sides and allowed Islam to spread freely, as people now had the chance to hear its message without the noise of war. During this period of peace, many tribes entered Islam. The Prophet, PBUH, also began sending letters to kings and rulers beyond Arabia, inviting them to Islam. Some rejected the call, others showed interest. But the message had begun to reach far beyond the deserts of Arabia. Islam was no longer just a local movement, it was becoming a global mission. 2 years later, the Quraysh violated the treaty by attacking an ally of the Muslims. This betrayal gave the Prophet, PBUH, the right to respond. He prepared a large army and marched towards Mecca, yet even in this moment of strength, he showed mercy. When the Muslims entered Mecca, there was no bloodshed. The Prophet, PBUH, declared a general amnesty. Those who had once been his enemies were forgiven. He entered the city with humility, his head bowed in gratitude to Allah. One of his first actions was to cleanse the Kaaba of idols. He ordered the removal of every false god and restored the Kaaba to the worship of Allah alone, just as Prophet Ibrahim had built it. The people of Mecca, who once mocked and opposed him, now witnessed his mercy and justice. Many of them embraced Islam, moved not by force but by the Prophet's character. The conquest of Mecca was not just a military victory. It was the triumph of truth, forgiveness, and compassion. After Mecca, Islam spread rapidly across Arabia. Tribes that once fought against the Muslims now came forward to pledge their loyalty. The Prophet, PBUH, continued to guide his followers with wisdom, teaching them the principles of faith, justice, and kindness. He reminded them that true success was not in wealth or power, but in obedience to Allah and service to humanity. In the 10th year after Hijrah, the Prophet, PBUH, performed his farewell pilgrimage. It was during this pilgrimage that he delivered his famous sermon, known as the Farewell Sermon. In it, he emphasized the equality of all humans, declaring that no Arab has superiority over a non-Arab, nor does a non-Arab over an Arab, and that no white person has superiority over a black person. nor does a black person over a white person, except by piety and righteousness. He reminded the people to treat women with kindness, to uphold justice, and to hold firmly to the Quran and his teachings. This sermon summarized the essence of Islam and served as guidance for generations to come. Not long after returning from this pilgrimage, the Prophet, PBUH, fell ill. His health weakened day by day, yet he continued to lead and advise his community as much as he could. When he was too weak to lead the prayer, he asked Abu Bakr to lead in his place, signaling his trust in his closest companion. On his final day, the Prophet, PBUH, spoke of the importance of prayer and kindness to those under one's care. With his family around him and his followers filled with grief, he returned to his Lord at the age of 63. His passing was a moment of great sorrow for the Muslims, but his message and example remained alive in their hearts. The legacy of Prophet Muhammad, PBUH, was more than just a religion. He transformed a society divided by tribes, injustice, and ignorance into a community united by faith, justice, and compassion. His life became a model of honesty, mercy, patience, and devotion to Allah. He left behind the Quran and his Sunnah, guiding light for all who seek truth. From a humble beginning in Mecca, the message of Islam spread across the world, carried by the teachings of the Prophet, PBUH. His story is not just history. It's a timeless lesson in faith, perseverance, and humanity. He showed that true greatness lies in serving others, in forgiving even one's enemies, and in living every moment with consciousness of Allah. Thus ends the story of Prophet Muhammad, PBU, the final messenger of Allah, whose life and legacy continue to inspire billions of people across the globe.